Welcome to College Football Playoff Top 25, presented by Goodyear.
1 week from tonight, the College Football Playoff Selection Committee will lock teams into the starting blocks for the stretch run. And those rankings will have an expiration date of 1 week. Because 1 week from Saturday, an epic showdown looms. Might even be 1 versus 2 in the initial rankings, and that game is still shrouded in a degree of mystery. But this season's been much more defined by shocks than showdowns. Remember when the Sooner schooner tipped over? It was as if it was foreshadowing Oklahoma crashing coming around a curve at Kansas State. For the third straight week, a heavily favored top 10 team bought it and got shuffled back in the pack. So 9 teams now remain perfect, holding on to that 0 in the lost column. Some of them no shots, some of them long shots for sure, but it should carry some weight because we keep getting reminded week after week how difficult it is to remain perfect.
Can K-State slow down the Sooners? We're about to find out. But Kansas State is rolling Oklahoma. Third rushing touchdown of the game for Jalen Hurts. The Sooners recovered.
After review, the ball was illegally touched.
To dominate the #1 defense in the country like that, impress you?
I think in all honesty, we could have put up 50.
Travis Etienne, third of the ball game.
How long are you going to give yourself to enjoy this and then get ready for the next one?
About 2 seconds.
Michigan is mauling Notre Dame.
Hauls it in. What a catch.
Let the people shout, let the people shout. Whoa, they don't even know what they're talking about.
North Carolina picks it off.
What an ending.
Just be safe, have fun, enjoy the night.
The ultimate in college football reality TV commences next week. When the rankings come out, we see them the exact same time you do. Glad to have you with us. College Football Playoff Top 25. Kirk Herbstreit, David Pollack, Joey Galloway, and Jesse Palmer, along with me, Rece Davis. We're going to find out who the guys think the top 6 are. We'll be showing you what the AP says right now. Final time we'll look at the AP this week. College football rankings brought to you by Goodyear. LSU takes the top spot, first time since 2011 for the Bayou Bengals. By the way, Coach O will join us later on in the show. Second time this year, the #1 team in the country won and lost the top spot in the polls. This time it was Alabama. Look how close it is. 4 different teams getting first place votes. It's the closest vote among the top 3 since the AP poll went to its current weighted voting format in 1978. Only 8 points separating LSU and Ohio State, both of them getting the same number of first place votes at 17. So you can make a case for any of the top 4 to be #1. Kirk, who's your top 6?
I'm going to start with Ohio State. I think they've been the most complete team from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, offensively and defensively. In fact, #1 in the nation, offensive efficiency. #2 in the nation, defensive efficiency. I have LSU at #2 based on the way they've executed. Great win last week against Auburn, where they had to kind of grind out a victory. Alabama at 3. Those 2 teams obviously meet on the 9th there in Tuscaloosa. Clemson coming off their best game of the year at 4. Penn State right there at 5. And then, David, I have the Florida Gators at 6.
At 1, I have the University of Chase Young. I don't know if I'm going to say anything else. He's been the most dominant player in college football, and he's going to be a handful for everybody. And I just think that's the difference in everybody else in the top teams in the country. 2, LSU, the most battle-tested. We start going down the list. LSU, Alabama, Clemson. I think they're all in the same vein. LSU's done the most. Alabama looked good with Mac Jones at quarterback. Clemson continues to take care of business. Penn State, if that offense keeps finding itself, I tell you what, and continue to improve, make big plays, the defense is dirty and good enough to beat anybody. So, and then Florida rounding out the top 6.
Yeah, mine looks similar to Kirk and David. I would just flip-flop 1 and 2. I've got LSU at #1. They need a bye week right now after those emotional and physical games recently against the Gators and Auburn. Ohio State I've got #2. Looked very impressive and dominant again, this time against Wisconsin, the best opponent they played this year. And I think they've got 3 different guys that should be in the conversation for the Heisman Trophy right now. It's not just Chase Young, as David pointed out. Mac Jones looked great this past weekend against Arkansas for Alabama. I got them 3, Clemson 4. The more I watch Sean Clifford play, guys, the more I like him at Penn State. So I've got the Nittany Lions at #5. And Joey, the Gators, to me, the best one-loss team in the country and getting healthy right now at the right time on both sides of the ball.
I have the defending national champion who is undefeated in Clemson at number 1. We talk so much about Trevor Lawrence and interceptions. They've only played in one close game and blown everyone else out, so they're still number 1 for me. LSU has done more in this season than we've seen in recent history and what they've been able to accomplish at number 2. Alabama, we believe Tua will be back and ready to play LSU in 2 weeks. That'll be their first real test where we know how talented they are. For number 4, Ohio State, Chase Young has been so good that we've sort of overlooked what J.K. Dobbins has done at running back. He's been outstanding also, like Jesse just said. It's been fun to watch Penn State and Sean Clifford mature with his weapons on the outside and Hamler and Freiermuth. And then Florida, this team that's dealt with a ton of injuries but still sitting at number 6.
Big theme I could take from all of that is if you wear number 2 at Ohio State, you are worthy of Heisman Trophy consideration. You could make a case for any of these teams to be number 1. And Joey, you've been steadfast in keeping Clemson in the top spot. What do you value most when you're trying to split hairs and separate these teams?
I really look at a team's ability to create a mismatch for a team that they played. And so we know Clemson is as talented as anyone in the country, especially on the offensive side. And that's where our concern has been. Trevor Lawrence and his interceptions at times offensively, they don't look great. But we've seen this team play great, and we know with those weapons, with Ross and Higgins and Amari Rodgers, and you add Overton to that mix now, had a few touchdowns last game, ETN in the backfield, ACC Player of the Year. So we know what kind of talent they are, and anybody they play, no matter whether it's the top 4 or top 20, they're going to create such a mismatch on offense that they are going to be tough to beat, and those mismatches are what I look at.
You know, Joey, if you look at Clemson, we kind of tease you about keeping them at 1 after the season that they've had up to this point. You can make an argument that if you're forecasting down the road, this Clemson defense, I can't believe it. I mean, they lose all those defensive linemen, and Brent Venables has a defense that's better this year than maybe they were last year, at least at this point statistically. And it's a matter of time. We got a little taste of it last week with what Trevor Lawrence was able to do with those weapons, and they were finally able to hit on all cylinders. Their potential is through the roof. We just, as Joey, you said, we just haven't seen it on a consistent basis. That's why, to answer Rece's question, what do I look for? Consistency. That's what splits hairs for me of Ohio State over LSU and Alabama. Is you can maybe find a bad start, like a bad first quarter, but for 4 quarters, man, this team is as much as Chase Young gets all the attention. David, that offense and the way they can hurt you running the ball, Justin Fields with more reps just getting better and better for that passing game.
Yeah, and we all know all these teams. First of all, it's kind of like what you like. I mean, what are you in favor of? Because LSU, there's no denying. Everybody knows they got the best resume. So the committee can look at LSU and go, they've done the most. They've proved the most to me to be worthy of number 1. And I'll go, okay, I agree. No problem with that. If they put Ohio State number 1, yeah, their resume might not stack up with LSU's resume. But like you just said, they've dominated everybody. And if I watch with my eyes, dude, my eyes tell me that team is stout on both sides of the football. So Alabama's had more weaknesses and less domination than we've seen, and they haven't played the level of competition of LSU and those guys yet. So I think it's going to be interesting to see right away what the committee values. Is it going to be the eyeball test and the dominance, or is it going to be the resume and what you've accomplished?
Yeah, David, I can't wait to see next week when the rankings come out where the selection committee puts Clemson, because I think all of us would agree of any of the top 6 teams on our list right now, Clemson's probably the most likely, the lock to make the playoff based on the conference they play in, based on how good they can be when they're playing their A game. I just think for all of us, it's human nature to remember how good Clemson was a year ago, especially in the second half of the year, how good Trevor Lawrence was late in the season, especially in the national championship game. But I agree. I think if you're evaluating 2019 on the field through 9 weeks, there has been inconsistency on offense. Trevor Lawrence hasn't been as consistently good as the other quarterbacks, at least in all of our top 4s. And they do have that one close game, narrow win against UNC, which the other teams in our top 4, they don't have a win as narrow as that. So I think if you're just evaluating what you've seen this year, it's fair to at least have Clemson number 4 right now. But I think all of us agree, easily talented enough when they play their A game to be the best team in the country.
That's where I had Clemson in my AP poll ballot until last week. Without Tua Tagovailoa, who at least to me, Kirk, has covered some deficiencies by Alabama standards, not by normal standards, but maybe a pedestrian running game, defense that hasn't been as stout as typically at Alabama. Tagovailoa has covered all of those sins, and without him, I don't know that I look at them as being a contender to win the national championship. Is he that important in your judgment?
Yeah, I mean, Mac Jones did a nice job, but it was Arkansas. I mean, here comes the LSU Tigers to town on the 9th, and you better have all hands on deck. I think we're all going to assume, Joey touched on it, that 13's going to be out there. Let's hope he doesn't have a play like that, where everybody holds their breath and he doesn't have to come off limping. That, I think, would be everybody's worst fear. When you get two heavyweights like this going good against good, you want everybody to be on the field. But, Rece, without a doubt, you can't take Tua off the field and expect this team to still be at the same level. I mean, he's one of the elite players, possibly the first pick next year in the draft. And David, to me, I'm just going to assume or Joseph, I'm going to assume that Tua is going to be out there because without him, even though it's Nick Saban and they're at home and they may even feel like an underdog, they got to have Tua out there playing quarterback to have a chance to outduel Joe Burrow in that Joe Brady offense.
Mac Jones is saying, what else do I need to show you guys? I mean, he just went 18 of 22. Had an outstanding
against the
game.
Rutgers of the SEC.
Now, believe me.
Arkansas.
Yeah, but
Arkansas.
But he did it against the team he was playing. Sorry, he can only do what he did against the team he's playing now. I agree. It would be great to have Tua, and I do believe that Tua gives Alabama a better chance to win. But at the same time, we just watched LSU Auburn play when Bo Nix went 15 of 35, and it was a 3-point ball game. And so as much as I want Tua to be back, I don't know that if he doesn't play, that Alabama doesn't have a chance to win this game. So we just seen poor quarterback play. Now, believe me, Auburn's defense is outstanding and keeps them in every game, and Alabama's defense hadn't been that great. But with Tua, they have a much better chance to win. I just don't know that they need him to beat this LSU team, but I think he'll be back.
Well, if I'm watching, I don't have a lot of confidence in saying that. I know Mac Jones just lit up Arkansas, but that he's going to go tick for tack with Joe Burrow. And Joey, let's be honest, it was quick game, it was throwbacks, it was very intermediate, very easy passes. It was nothing very difficult. Till the end, he showed you some RPOs and a deep ball to Judy that was nice. But listen, you're going to need Tua. You're going to need his timing. You're going to need his big play ability, and more importantly, you're going to need his experience. Because guys, I don't think LSU's defense is on the level as it's been, but they're still going to trot 4 corners out there that can make life difficult on any receiving core, even this one, to make you have to execute and throw balls, into tighter windows than you'd want. And that's got to be Tua, not Mac Jones, if they want to beat LSU.
Yeah, David, and let's be honest, too. Rece sort of mentioned it earlier. This is just a different Alabama team than the one that we've seen compete for national championships in years past, where this year it's not Mark Ingram or Trent Richardson or Derrick Henry wearing your defense down and a defense that's entirely suffocating. The reason Alabama is dangerous is because they can outscore you, and they're going to have to outscore LSU. They're going to have to outscore opponents if they get to the SEC title game and in the playoff, and to do that, you need to. I agree. I give Sark a ton of credit for the game plan he had set up for Jones. A lot of those throws were at the line of scrimmage or behind to get his confidence going. He did hit a deep cross. He hit a go route, and that looks great. But I think against LSU, you have to be able to go vertical. Tua gives them their best chance to do that.
And, Jesse, I think you just touched on it, and it's going to be very different. Now, it may not live up to what we expect, but we think of LSU and Alabama, we think of running the football, defense, field position, who's going to get a turnover, old school SEC. This is going to be Big 12-like. This potentially, both defenses aren't up to their standard, and yet both offenses are at a whole different level. Rece, I think this one has a chance to be a shootout, and that's even more of a reason that you have to have Tua back there to try to stay up with Joe Burrow.
Okay, here's a real quick one for you. 2011 is the last time that LSU beat Alabama. It's a game David referenced, a 9-6 game. Only 12 points scored in that game in regulation. It was an overtime game. Over-under, 12 points in the first quarter. Over-under, Herbie, first quarter.
Over.
Joey?
Over.
Way
possessions, over.
Okay, David?
Over. First 2 possessions.
First 2 possessions?
I was going to say first 2 drives.
Take the under.
Track meet.
Take the under 7-3 into the first quarter, and then they'll start getting it. Now we go. Now we go. After we feel each other out for a little bit. Coach O will join us a little bit later on. Also, Penn State's remaining undefeated. Penn State also among the teams that benefited from Oklahoma's loss. Gators and Dogs are going to play a virtual elimination game in terms of the playoff and a likely SEC East championship game. Coach O, as I mentioned, will be here. We'll talk about what he's going to do during the off week as he gets ready for the showdown against Alabama.
College Football Playoff Top 25 is presented by Goodyear, celebrating those who rise above. Goodyear, more driven. This is College Football Playoff Top 25, presented by Goodyear.
Stand up! Stand up!
Come on, college football.
It's hot!
Oh yeah, what a good call. Come on.
Stand up! Here we go! Stand up! Here we go!
Oh yeah.
The biggest marquee game every week on College Game Day.
What a great start for SMU, still undefeated, going on the road at Memphis, who escaped against Tulsa, but still a dangerous offensive team. College Game Day going to Memphis for the first time. That's one of two ranked matchups on the weekend. The other is Georgia against Florida. Both have a loss this year, and this basically serves as an elimination game, one would think, barring some crazy circumstances in terms of college football playoff considerations, but still winner with a great shot to go to the SEC championship game and stay alive in that playoff hunt. Okay, Georgia and Florida, top 8 matchup. Pollack, what's the most important factor that'll decide this game?
Georgia's offense. I mean, it's very simple. I know what I'm going to get from Georgia's defense. I know what I get from Florida's offense and Florida's defense. It's Georgia's offense. Can they create big plays on the outside? This is an offense that's been run the football down your throat and be able to play action and create big plays. That has not been the case this season. And so I think Jake Fromm and his new wide receivers are going to be center stage after a bye. And what did you come up with, and how does this offense look besides the game?
Yeah, David, Jake Fromm really hasn't seen like himself these last 2 weeks in the passing game. He's got a lot of pressure with a really inexperienced receiver group going against a good secondary from Florida and potentially a great pass rush if Grenard and Zuniga make it back on. I'm going to flip the other side of the ball. I'm going to say Florida's defense and their ability to stop the run. That's something the Gators haven't been great at doing their last 2 games. They give up 9 yards a carry against LSU. They give up 217 rushing yards against South Carolina. A lot of explosive runs. And Kirk, we've seen since week 0, you saw it up close and personal, Gators not necessarily a great tackling secondary. So I think getting Grenard and Zuniga will help and maybe create some TFLs in the backfield. But going up against the biggest offensive line in college football and one of the best running backs in DeAndre Swift and a good group of backs, the Gators have to be able to stop the run.
Well, I think you can get the linebackers down because you don't necessarily respect the vertical passing game. Because I think Fromm's throwing the ball well with the high efficiency throws, but there are a lot of short to intermediate throws. They're 106th in the nation at big plays or explosives in the passing game. And it's not Jake Fromm. It's not the offensive line. It's not Swift. It's just this inexperienced group of wide receivers have not come along maybe the way they had hoped. But against Florida, if they don't stretch the field, that Gators defense that you're talking about, Jesse, I see them with 8, 9 guys up close to the line of scrimmage, basically saying to Fromm and those receivers, hey, beat our corners man to man, and then we'll back out. But until you make us back out, we're going to load that line of scrimmage and take away your strength, Joey, which is the running game and that short, quick throws from Jake Fromm.
I'm going to look at both quarterbacks in this situation. Jesse, you mentioned Jake Fromm hadn't looked great the last 2 games. All his interceptions, he has 3 of them on the season, were in the one game. And then the last game they played, they were in a torrential downpour. So I'm going to sort of give him a pass on the last one. We've seen Jake Fromm play at a high level and complete over 70% of his balls in this season. And you mentioned Grenard and Zuniga being back. He might not have time to stretch the field. He might have to get out of his hands because those two are so good at rushing the passer. And Trask has stepped in for Felipe Franks and been terrific so far. If he can continue to play the way he is, and when you talk about getting Tony back give him a big play wide receiver out wide, if he can just do what he's done, he doesn't have to go in and beat the world, but still be consistent the way he is, Florida offensively will have a chance to win this game. And so I'm looking at both these quarterbacks and who can come in and have the best game and not make mistakes.
You know, I think one of the things that we overlook just because Georgia is so talented is the fact that they have 2 new coordinators this year. And Kirk, I thought what you said was interesting about the receivers being inexperienced. They have some talent there. How much does the lack of explosiveness in the passing game you put on that as opposed to the new offensive coordinator, James Coley? Maybe it's a structural thing or maybe it's a comfort thing with him calling plays, running the offense now. How much of that is a valid critique?
Well, yeah, without being in the meeting rooms and knowing, I have no idea how much or to what extent that that's being missed. I know Jim Chaney is an outstanding offensive coordinator, and I know from doing a lot of their playoff games and big bowl games that they were step for step. Even going back to Fromm in his freshman year, after they lost to Jordan-Hare, they bounced back and ended up playing and ended up having a heck of a run that year. Came up a little bit short against Bama, but that's a good point, a fair point. Coley's capable, David, but you lose an offensive coordinator and a guy that you really grew up in the system with. I think maybe it's a combination of the two. They're still trying to feel each other out from a play calling standpoint, but without question, there's potential on the perimeter, David, and you see it all the time down there. We just haven't seen it in the games in 2019.
No, and what you saw in the loss to South Carolina was a lot of man coverage from South Carolina, a lot of physical play, and Georgia's wide receivers didn't win. You know what else you saw? And we talk about whether you want to blame OC, whether you want to blame quarterback. 2 of Jake Fromm's picks in that game weren't his fault. One was a wrong route, or incorrect route. Another one, ball goes right through the receiver's hands. So I think the receivers have to do a better. And listen, guys, if y'all, and we're all watching these teams, Swift is a dynamic receiver. You got to find ways to throw him the football. James Cook comes in off the bench, and you can tell he's dynamic. So I think it's manufacturing ways to get those guys. Alabama last week was down their quarterback. You saw the spitting on the perimeter really quick and make a throwback to a tight end, making things very simple and very easy. I think they have to find a way to do that and make it easier for them.
Georgia's loss to South Carolina started this trend that is now 3 weeks and running of highly ranked teams in the top 10, heavy favorites, at least 3 touchdowns, falling into quicksand. Oklahoma was the latest to do it against Kansas State. They were nearly 24-point favorite, and OU lost 48-41. They were down big, made a rally. It wasn't enough. Skylar Thompson of the Wildcats, 4 touchdowns. They recovered a crucial onside kick attempt after a review. And the Sooners weren't able to rally, and as a result, they fall down to number 10 in the Associated Press and took a hit in their terms of trying to get a chance to reach the college football playoff. Baylor is still undefeated in the Big 12. The All-State playoff predictor, my buddy Brad Edwards, pointing out that the biggest beneficiaries from Oklahoma's loss this past weekend, the losers of the Alabama-LSU game and the Ohio State-Penn State game coming up, at least in terms of the All-State playoff predictor, should those teams remain unbeaten and that be their only loss. So, Jesse, as you look at Oklahoma and Baylor, contenders at the top of the Big 12 right now, who do you have more faith in?
Oklahoma, because I know they can score every week with Lincoln Riley calling plays, and Jalen Hurts is still playing at a Heisman caliber, guys. He basically threw for 400 yards and ran for 100 yards with 4 touchdowns, losing against Kansas State. The defense was the disappointment. They looked like the defense we've seen the last couple of years that prevented this team for competing for national championships. I'm going to attribute it to a hiccup because they looked so much better the first half of the season. But, David, they've got to get better because, Joey, coming up, they still got Brock Purdy. They still have an explosive Baylor offense, and they still have to defend against Chuba in Oklahoma State. So this defense has to improve.
Yeah, I agree with you on feeling better about Oklahoma, but I can be swayed to Baylor. As we've seen in the past, I like this Baylor team. I think Matt Rule is a terrific coach, and I just jumped on them a couple years too early. But when you look at this Baylor team, they're a solid football team, but not really dynamic in any particular area. And we've seen Oklahoma be dynamic on the offensive side for years now. Defensively, we thought this was a better Oklahoma team. And I always say about football, you don't know what your weakness is until you play a team that is good enough to expose that weakness. Well, Oklahoma this weekend ran up against a team that could run the ball physically at them, and they weren't physical enough to stop Kansas State, and it ended up costing them in the end. I don't know many teams that win football games when a team rushes for 5 or 6 touchdowns in a game. With all that being said, I still like Oklahoma's chances to outscore the rest of their opponents.
Oklahoma the last 3 years now has lost a game in October. They've done it the last 3 years, and you kind of go, why? But the defense will give up a little bit. But this offense is not what it was in the past. And I know, Jesse, Jalen Hurts put up big numbers. He has to run the football a lot. Where's the other running backs helping him out? Where's the offensive line that we've seen in the past that just mauled people and got people out of the way, that created big holes? And then offensively, they could do so daggum much, man. They could stretch you with so many big plays in the passing game. It's not quite the same offensively. Listen, the defense I didn't think played as atrocious as we've seen in the past. I mean, we've seen some bad defense in the past from Oklahoma, but I trust Oklahoma's offense to continue to put up points. But Oklahoma's not an offense that's as good as it was in the past couple years to me.
I'll say Oklahoma as well. It kind of reminds me, in honor of the NCAA's announcement today that name and likeness will be afforded to the players. It reminds me of thinking about the NCAA video game. Joey and I used to put in about 8 to 10 hours a day back in the day, and I used to be the steady Eddie. I was the Baylor, and Joey was the OU, the flash and dash, and so I'll give Oklahoma the edge. Joey and I were close. It was close, but Joey had just a slight edge over me in that video game.
Kirk, I just want to make sure, though, Joey, that was after Joey stayed late after practice to throw routes, right, against there.
Joey, of course. Let me just tell you how
definitely.
annoying Joey was.
Okay.
Let me just tell you real quick. I'd be sitting there playing with Oklahoma or Florida State or LSU or Ohio State, and he'd look at me and my buddies on the couch. He's like, just give me Bowling Green or, whoever you want to give me is fine. It doesn't matter. And then he would beat us with Bowling Green or like whoever.
That's so bad.
It was annoying. It was really annoying.
Now that I hear that part of the story, Joey, I'm even more upset that you wouldn't at least spring for the pizza afterwards when you were getting all that NFL money at the end. And still,
hey, Rece, times were tough.
You owe me $4.85 for that pepperoni pizza. That's your share.
Dude just signed a $10 million contract, and he's asking me for $12.65. $12.65 from me. Hey, Big D, $12.65. Let's go, pizza.
Why do you think Joey still has that first paycheck? He's a shrewd investor and saver of money. Coach O is going to join us coming up. Before college football playoff top 25 gets completely off the rails, we'll talk about the showdown with Alabama and what Coach O is going to do. And don't forget, after the MLS Western Conference Finals, SportsCenter SVP, Nationals Astros reaction, Ja Morant's impact against LeBron and AD, Jimmy Butler's Heat debut against the Hawks. It is SportsCenter with SVP coming up tonight. Sometimes you prefer the heavyweights. Our Chick-fil-A impact players for the college football playoff, a couple of heavyweights. The last week's win against Auburn, Joe Burrow did it again. 321 yards passing, couple of touchdowns against that great Auburn defense, and LSU just wore them down on the ground. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he was key, 136 yards on 26 carries as LSU remains undefeated, and as a result of their great start and great wins, they have moved to the top of the AP poll. Pleased to be joined by Ed Orgeron, the head coach at LSU. Ed, tight battle at the top in the AP standings, still a week away from the College Football Playoff Selection Committee rankings. What's the significance to you of having the #1 team in the country?
Well, it's a great thing for our university. It's a great thing for recruiting, but it doesn't mean much right now. We have a big game in 2 weeks from now. We have to continue to win, continue to play well, and then when the real rankings comes out, that's when we want to be on the top.
Well, after the game last year against Alabama, you talked about strides that your team needed to make in order to be able to beat them. How would you describe the improvements, particularly on the lines of scrimmage, that your team has made?
You know, for us to get 200 yards rushing on a great Auburn defensive line means we made significant improvement on the offensive line in our running game, and I thought our defensive line played pretty well against Auburn's rushing attack. We have to win the line of scrimmage against Alabama.
What is this open week like when you know you have a huge game coming up, one that is so meaningful not only to your players but the LSU family at large, in terms of trying to hit the right notes and peak at
we get our chance for our football team to rest, watch a lot of film, and get our coaches a chance to prepare for a great game plan.
How would you describe the confidence level in going in against Alabama?
Yeah, I think our team's feeling pretty good. We have great leadership with Joe Burrow, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Grant Delpit. This is a seasoned group, a veteran group, but they also know we have to play our very best to win.
You've been in a ton of huge games like this, both as a head coach and an assistant coach. What will you look for from your team to make sure that they're at the right emotional pitch?
You know, great practices, attention to detail during the team period, hustling on and up the field, a great plane trip, a great focus the day of the game, and then take care of the football and win the line of scrimmage.
When I was visiting with you this summer during practice, you used the phrase in describing Joe Burrow, game changer. How much better, if at all, has he been than even you anticipated he could be?
You know, he made a lot of improvement from this year to last year. He's completed about 80% of his balls. The spread offense fits him. He's a great winner. He has intangibles that are off the chart. We're glad we have him.
When you look at this Alabama offense, and obviously everybody's still waiting to see whether Tua is going to be able to play, assuming that he's able to play, from a defensive standpoint, what's the number one thing you have to do against Alabama to disrupt their passing game?
You know, again, we have to win the line of scrimmage. Last year they ran the ball on us. You know, their RPOs are fantastic. Tua has a great release. They have great receivers, but it's all going to be about winning the line of scrimmage.
When you walk into that stadium a week from Saturday and Saturday afternoon, what do you expect the atmosphere to be like?
It's going to be wild. It's going to be crazy. SEC football is its best.
Ed, congratulations on making it number one. Can't wait to see this 1 versus 2 showdown coming up, and all the best. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Rece. Go Tigers.
Coach O has that team at number 1. Alabama has beaten LSU 8 straight times. The last time the Bayou Bengals won that 9-6 game in 2011. There was a rematch in the national championship game later that year. Could be more of an offensive game one would expect, and that is something Alabama is acutely aware of.
They're a very explosive offense. You know, they got a great system going on over there. You know, quarterback pretty good. They got great receivers. So, you know, we just looking forward to it.
The offense probably be the best offense we about to play in the SEC. So we got to do a good job up front, collapsing the pocket, and just getting back there.
You know, Tua always positive. You know, he never questions why, you know, anything like bad happens. You know, he just, you know, move forward and continue to work on like whatever he needs to work on to control what he can control at the time. And I feel like he's doing a good job with that mentally.
You know, Coach O said LSU needed a great plane trip. Nobody can talk great plane trips quite like Herbstreit, but instead, Kirk, Alabama has been in LSU's head since they beat them in the national championship game. What can make it different a week from Saturday?
If I won the coin toss, I'd take the ball. I think they have to send a message early. They got to start fast and say, not this year. It's different this year. It's a mentality. We've seen it all year. They've gone kind of against the grain from who they've been in the past, where they've been more conservative. This year, they've been throwing havoc to the wind, taking chances. They have to be willing to do that early in this game to get themselves to believe this year will be different. And, David, as far as a matchup, I think it's the wide receivers, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Terrace Marshall, matched up against that Alabama matchup zone. Turns out to be a lot of man-to-man. Who will win that battle, I think, will go a long way in telling us who wins this game.
It's crazy because we could flip that right on the other side, too, and take Alabama's wide receivers versus all of the playmaking and all the DBs and speed that they have in the back end with LSU. But, you know, it's going to be very interesting. It's interesting to see the business-as-usual approach for Alabama. But Alabama and LSU now run a very similar style of offense. A lot of RPOs, a lot of timing. Who can disrupt that? You know, but it's interesting. Both these offenses have evolved so much to being such pass-happy teams over the last several years, and they see the similar type of offense in practice.
Yeah, I agree with what Coach O said, guys, and I know we're all going to hype this as Tua versus Joe Burrow and Jerry Jeudy in that receiving group versus Justin Jefferson in that receiving group. But LSU is a balanced offense. It's not just Joe Burrow and Joe Brady in that passing attack. Like Coach O said, they're running the football. Look how well Clyde Edwards-Helaire has done against Florida, against Auburn. They can take advantage of the line of scrimmage and score multiple ways. There's a lot of pressure, Joy, in this Alabama defense, not just to stop the pass with the match zone that Kirk's talking about, but that inexperienced front seven, they're going to have to be physical if they're going to win this game.
I'm looking forward to seeing Tua back on the big stage. Last time we seen him in a big-time game was a national championship game, and that wasn't his best performance and went into an offseason and said he's working on a lot of things. And so this season, they haven't really played anyone the caliber of LSU. And so now he's getting back on the big stage. I want to see the way he plays in this situation, going against a team that can match them offensively. Again, hadn't seen that since last year in the national championship game. And so this will be the first time where not only is Tua getting back on the big stage, but he's getting back on the big stage against a quarterback on the other side that is playing football maybe is better than anyone in the entire country. So I'm looking forward to seeing how many points these teams put up. Jesse, I'm letting you know now for our virtual locks, I'm taking the over in this game in 2 weeks.
Of course you are.
I'm going to help all of us out a little bit on our social media right now. Yes, we know the game is not this Saturday. It's a week from Saturday. But it's commanding a lot of attention. It is going to be such an important factor in how the college football playoff rankings ultimately play out. So, too, Ohio State and Penn State coming up later on in November. Still to come in this edition of College Football Playoff Top 25. What about the Pac-12? You think they might have gotten help last Saturday? What do they have to do to get the playoff?
You're watching College Football Playoff Top 25, presented by Goodyear.
To say the moment of truth is here is corny and old-fashioned, but it's a fact.
It's the one you circle on your calendar.
You live with this son of a bitch for 365 days every year.
It's the one that'll make or break your year.
As those games get closer on the calendar, you can't hide from it.
The closer you are together, the more friction there's bound to occur.
And they're tearing down Michigan's coveted N-Club banner.
That's a rivalry. The long-standing rivalries are the ones that matter most.
Two giants coming together, both playing for keeps.
None can compare with this intra-state rivalry.
Rivalry games are a tremendous part of the evolution of college football.
Hate gets people out of the bed, and so does revenge.
Rivalry is definitely the fuel of college football.
Without rivals, it's kind of hard to distinguish yourself.
Some of the best rivalries are built around the identities of the people and the cities that they live in. There's some real hate involved.
We're not just talking about the game no more. We're talking about life in general.
You don't lose one of those games. You got beat.
As soon as we're done, CFB 150, the American game, rivalries. Now it fuels the passion for college football. If you've missed any of this great series, the American game, you can catch it on demand via the ESPN app. Well, Oregon has shown extreme toughness. Last couple of games came from behind to beat Washington, rallying from a 14-point deficit, converted some fourth downs along the way to beat UW in Seattle, and then avoided a hangover late last Saturday night, held off Washington State. Not some big plays, but ultimately, after Leach and the fellas took the lead, Camden Lewis had to knock one through the uprights to keep the Ducks on top in the Pac-12 North, and not only just keep them on top, they'd be on top anyway. This thing is a lock. They hold the tiebreaker over all those teams you see, save Oregon State, who is 2-2 in conference play. The South a little bit different because SC beat Utah head-to-head. It means that Utah is rooting hard for the Ducks to knock off the Trojans this week as they get set to go head-to-head and try to make it to that Pac-12 championship game. So as you look at this Utah and Oregon opportunity to get into the college football playoff, what would it take for you, Joey, to be able to see one of the Pac-12 teams make it into the 14 playoff?
I think we're going to need some help at the top with some teams losing, but we do know that a lot of the top teams have to play one another. Penn State, Ohio State have to play, and we've talked about LSU, Alabama, then Auburn, Alabama. There's a lot happening in that top 6 or 7 teams that have to play. But for the Pac-12 to get in, Utah, Oregon have to win out, play one another in the championship game. And if one of these teams is dominant in that game, Kirk, I think we're going to have a conversation at the end. But again, they're going to need a little bit of help at the top.
Speaking of help, I think Oklahoma last week losing to Kansas State was a big day for the Pac-12. And, Joey, you're right. I think Oregon needs to beat USC, which would help not only Utah, but it helps Larry Scott and potentially the Pac-12 championship game. Because if Utah and Oregon were to win out, that would create, I think, a lot of buzz for the Pac-12 championship with the winner coming out of that game with only one loss. And now with OU losing, David, you could almost kind of see a potential discussion between a one-loss, let's just say, for argument's sake, Oklahoma out of the Big 12, and maybe a one-loss team coming out of the Pac-12, and maybe a one-loss, loser in the team that doesn't get to Atlanta or doesn't get to Indianapolis. Maybe we have a big debate there at the end.
Well, and I think it's important to look at both of the losses. When I look at Oregon, they dominated the game against Auburn. Auburn found a way to come back and make plays and win. They lost. They did. When I look at the USC game, first of all, when you turn on Utah, besides their defense, our offensive best player, Zach Moss, he got hurt that game. He only had 6 carries. I mean, he is what makes this offense go. They're a physical team, and he's part of it, the bowling ball effect and running the football. And you saw them struggle inside of the red zone and fumble the ball, and you saw them only kick field goals. And I think that would have been a different outcome possibly against USC. So both had losses that I feel like they could have won the ball game moving forward. Big opportunity for Utah against Washington this week. Utah's got a lot on their schedule left now after that to beat Oregon to put themselves, I think, in the mix with some help.
Isn't it funny, guys? We've been talking about it the last couple weeks. Can the Pac-12 get into the playoff? If so, who is it? I think we've all said Oregon. What if you're Kyle Whittingham right now in Utah? Don't you just feel like you're sort of just under the water, in the weeds right now, waiting for your opportunity, and you're cheering hard for Oregon to win the rest of their games? You take care of your business, you get to the Pac-12 title game, you get that win. That could be a better win than anybody in the Big 12 has by the end of the season. And from a talent standpoint, I don't think there's any gap between Oregon and Utah. I think Utah's defense is better. They're more dominant. Their D-line has been living in people's backfields, led by Bradley and Nye. We've mentioned Zach Moss. And while Tyler Huntley, a quarterback, he's not the NFL prospect that Justin Herbert is, he's completed more than 70% of his balls and thrown one pick. He's playing exceptionally well. I agree with what David just said about their loss at USC with the injuries of quarterback and running back losing by 7. The committee should give them credit for that. So I think if you're Kyle Whittingham, you love where you're positioned right now.
Both of these teams have their hands full on the road. Oregon at USC, Utah at Washington this weekend. Look at our PlayStation player impact rating. Oregon's backfield led by C.J. Verdell. He put 257 on Wazoo last week. And Zach Moss, who we've talked about, the highest PlayStation player impact rating among Pac-12 running backs. Saturday night football and college game day coming your way from Memphis. SMU still undefeated, taking on the Tigers Saturday night, 7:30 Eastern.
College Football Playoff Top 25 is presented by Goodyear, celebrating those who rise above. Goodyear, more driven.
Joining us as he will every week, the chair of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, Rob Mullins, also the athletic director at Oregon. Rob, I know you guys are going to get together next Monday and put out the initial rankings, just a starting point. We understand that. But the last couple of years, massive face plants by teams that otherwise might have been in playoff contention ended up costing them. We've already seen several of those in the early going. How do you think that these heavily favored teams losing to mediocre teams will impact the first rankings and how they stack up?
Well, obviously, we're looking at the full resumes of everybody, Rece, and those do play into it. But, you know, when you line up these teams, we're looking at every game that everybody played, and obviously winning matters, but who you play matters. And so we'll be looking at all of that.
Obviously, another storyline. We've already spent a lot of time talking about the upcoming Alabama-LSU game, even though it's still a week away. Give us an outline of how the committee views injured players in the event that Tua Tagovailoa is either not able to play or not at full strength when he plays.
Well, that's an important piece, and the committee will certainly be aware from the conference point persons as well as ourselves watching all the games of what key players were in the games and what key players were missing and the impacts on those games. So it is an important factor.
When you guys start talking about this, how is that discussed? Is that discussed in a quantitative measure? Is a subjective measure? Do you compare how teams do with or without a certain player in the lineup?
Probably all the above. I mean, obviously, you know, there's the subjective piece of, you know, what was happening before that key player was injured, who they were playing without the key player, and then what they looked like without the key player. So all of the above.
One of the things that we debate a lot is not getting caught up in just looking at a team solely because they're undefeated. Evaluate who they played, when they played, and what the strength of schedule is, all of that. Yet with all the upsets you see, that 0 in the loss column still carries some power. How would you describe the power of remaining undefeated regardless of schedule strength?
Well, we're looking at all factors, but, number one priority is winning all of your games, but it also does matter who you play. So, it's a mix of both. Obviously, you want to win every game, but you also have to take into account when we're trying to look at college football, where there's all types of different schedules of who you have played to achieve the record that you've earned.
Ask the guys at the top. You can make a case for any of the top 4 in the AP poll to be number 1, maybe even make a case for Penn State as well. I asked them, what do you value most when you're splitting hairs? In your role on that committee, what do you value most when you're splitting hairs and trying to rank one team at number 1 or just one team above another one?
Well, we always lean on the protocol, right? We start every meeting with the protocol, and so we start with that. And, part of that is results, strength of schedule, common opponents, and so we're looking at that. But at the top, the eye test is important in what we're seeing. And fortunately, our committee doesn't start meeting until after week 10, so we have a good body of work to start from. But, it's a combination of eye test, and then I do intermix some data with that.
Rob, we appreciate your time. The questions were very easy this week. They will get more difficult as the season unwinds down through November. Rob, thanks a lot for being with us.
Appreciate you having me, Rece.
And on top of that, the guys in the 4 boxes around all just nodding in agreement, saying, yeah, I'll buy everything Rob Mullins said. That might change next week. Real rankings come out next week from the State Farm Champions Classic. We'll see you again. The American game coming up next.